Hi, my name is Ann Elliott. I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com, and today I wanted to share with you 3 stages of Hebrew education in the first century. I think that you're going to pull some really good pointers about education in the 21st century. Is that where we are? First of all, in the first century, according to what we can read in Jewish sources, to the best of our knowledge, children started school about age 5 or age 6, and they went to what was called Bet Sefer, which is the house of the book. They would learn how to read, and when I say learn how to read, I mean in Hebrew, read and write, and they would learn the Torah. And oftentimes, from some sources, it even says that they would memorize the Torah. So this was the beginning. I did find it interesting that one rabbi said, if you set your child to regular study before it is 6 years old, you shall always have to run after and yet never get a hold of it. I think the warning that the rabbis were saying was don't start your children in really deep academic studies too young. It's not good for their health. It's not good for their development. They need to be running around and playing at that age and not necessarily having their head stuck in a book. And if I could give any advice to parents today, it would be don't be too quick to throw your children into academic studies. Let them be a child. Let them play. Play is super important for our brains. And it is interesting that they recognize that even in the first century. Around age 10, some children would be able to go off into Bet Talmud, and that was the house of learning. But most children actually learned occupations starting around that age. It says you can read, you can write, you can do all of the things that make it possible for you to be obedient to the Torah. Now let's give you skill. And I think around that age was when they would learn things like math if it was needed. But much of it was an apprenticeship program, and I find that so fascinating. I think our children would thrive if we would give them actual skills that they could use in their everyday life. And yes, science and history and math are important at that time, but maybe we should make it very applicable to their life. For those children that would go off to the Bet Talmud, they would learn the rest of the Old Testament and begin to learn what the sages said and commentary about the entire Tanakh, or that's what we would call the Old Testament. So again, this emphasizes to me that this is the time when you apply Torah to history, to the kings that have lived, to see what the lives of Israel all through all the centuries, how was it affected by their obedience or more likely disobedience to the Torah. And I think this is a really important thing that we can teach our middle-aged kids and even into high school. Finally, there was the Bet Midrash, which means the house of study. This time they would have a rabbi that they would be yoked to and follow in every way possible. If your rabbi puts his shoe on in this way, then you should put your shoe on in that way. And I find it so interesting because Yeshua tells us to take up his yoke, and his yoke is easy, and to come and follow him. And now not very many young men were chosen to do this. Most young men by this time had to be starting a career and thinking about marriage and having children. But it is very fascinating. I think about if Peter was out fishing and Rabbi Yeshua came along and said, "Come follow me." He just dropped his nets and came. One blogger said it was a little bit like if Michael Jordan came along and said, "I'm looking for someone to train in everything I know about basketball, and I want him to be exactly like me." And you thought about all the millions you could make if you could be just like Michael Jordan, you would drop everything and go, right? So it's a little similar to when Yeshua calls. We want to follow him in everything. Now, one of the techniques that the rabbis would use, both at the young age of, say, 10 and up, and also into the Bet Midrash level, more adulthood, is that they would use a technique of question and answer that's a little different than what we do. Our question and answer, someone asks us a question, we give them the rote answer. But in theirs, they would expect you to reply to their question with another question. So for instance, if someone would say, "What does it mean to love Yehovah with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength?" And you would say, "Does it not mean this, to love your neighbor as yourself?" That would be one possibility. For instance, in our culture, we might say, "So why did the Americans want to have a revolution against England?" And you might say, "Well, is it not because they felt that Britain was taking away all of their rights and trying to steal everything that was valuable to them. And then the teacher might say, well, what were the things that were valuable to them? And you might say, was it not the ability to work in freedom and not be taxed so heavily that you could not pay your bills? Another example, your son might come to you and say, should I take this job, Mom? And you might say, well, what would you feel like you could accomplish with that job? Do you see how they're replying with a question? Another one, your small child might say, Mom, why is the sky blue? And you might say, have you ever learned what happens when sunlight is filtered through dust particles? And then your child try to answer back and forth with questions, and it helps you to see how another person is processing the thoughts that they've heard and how they are learning. And I just think it's really revolutionary, really. And I know that's from the first century, but I think we should get back to some of these teaching techniques. So I hope you got some tidbits from this, some just little bits of how you might teach better and how to approach your children at specific ages and what things are really good for them to be learning. If you'd like to learn more, you can join us at homeschoolingtorah.com, where we try to use the Bible as our primary textbook. Shalom.